Good afternoon, everyone, Beltug members, ladies, gentlemen, and welcome in this session, this online session about the Data Act. Of course, all of our initiatives and all of our sessions are a team effort. So as a team, we hope and we make sure that you have a fruitful and an inspiring session this afternoon. My colleague Levi is online here as well, and he will also keep an eye on the chat. So during this session, make sure to post your questions and your comments in the chat during the presentations. Later on, we have a Q&A, and there I'll ask you to open your cameras. For now, can I ask everyone to keep the microphones down and to keep the cameras closed, just to keep our screen a bit at ease, also for the recording later on. Mid-September, that is only last month, the Data Act came into effect. That was on Friday, 12th of September. And this Data Act is a true game changer in a good way. For starters, with the standard contractual clauses for cloud computing contracts, clauses that focus on switching clouds and on the exit from a cloud. So let's explore this afternoon how to make the best use of these SCCs, these standard contractual clauses, these SCCs, in conversations and in negotiations with our cloud providers. As our president, Claude Rapoport, stated during our VIP evening earlier this year, more than other regulations, the Data Act intends to create new business opportunities. A very hopeful and a very optimistic message. By the way, you can read his entire talk on our website, the talk he gave during that VIP evening. I'll share the link to the Beltug website in the chat in a few minutes. Claude is also one of our speakers today. And today we want to inform you and raise awareness about the contract clauses proposed by the Data Act. Suppliers are not obliged to use them, so we want to highlight the added value of using them and the benefits and really encourage you to use them. Claude will kick us off in a few minutes. He was a member of the expert group that wrote the contractual clauses. He gives us the context of the Data Act and a brief overview. He sets the scene, so to speak. Then next, Simon Verschaven from DLA Piper zooms in on the clauses and elaborates on how to actually use these clauses. A bit different from the program that we gave you in the invitation, we will then take a moment for questions and answers. The simple reason is that Claude has to leave us before the end of the session, so we want to make sure that he as well can respond to your questions. So after Simon's presentation, we take a few minutes for questions and comments. And then after that, finally, we turn to practice with Anas Lamrini, and he will share how SMALS will put these standard contractual clauses into practice. Our speakers are very open to your questions, very open for discussions and for your comments. So as I said, make sure to post them in the chat. This is a Beltug session. We're all about sharing and exchanging of knowledge. When taking the floor, sometimes a question is easier put when vocal and not in half a book in the chat. So when taking the floor, can we ask, please first state your name and the company you work for? That gives a bit of context to your comment or your question. I moderate this session in English just because I'm lazy and I don't want to switch languages every 5 sentences. However, when you take the floor, take the liberty to do so in Dutch or in French, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'll give the floor in a minute to Claude, and we wrap up at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. And meanwhile, I wish you plenty of inspiration that you can maybe share on LinkedIn. And when you do so, when you pick up on something interesting, why not tag Beltug in your posts?
Thank you for giving this information for starting the session. And today I was asked to make a kind of introduction to the subject. And what I find the most important element in the Data Act is that it should be a game changer. So just want to move to the next slide. Is that okay? Yes. So the Data Act was written to be a game changer with its different chapters. And for I think one of the first time on the regulations, instead of reacting to situations on the market like GDPR reacted to the fact that the personal data were stolen by a lot of companies, here the Commission had a vision on the future and said, well, the economy of data, the business made around data, not around products or not, but around data, will be a very big business in the future. And we would like, as the Commission, to create a fair data economy by ensuring a fair access and use of the data, which is really, as you see there with big eyes, a very big challenge. And for the part of today, the challenge we will talk about is the challenge about the market of cloud services. And, well, if you look at the situation on the market, I say before 12 September, but I think today it has not changed that much yet. Well, a lot of companies go to the cloud and have no idea how to get the data back, how long it can take, and how much it can cost. I heard people saying, well, it might even cost 500,000 euro or perhaps even more just to get the data out of the environment of the provider. And so you can really see the market with the companies being really locked in. And with the information we got, less than 5% of cloud contracts include a good switching and exit clause. And that is exactly what the Data Act intends to change. And as you can imagine, it is a very big change, and it addresses big players and other players too. But the big players are really in a situation where today, after 12 September, they are not in line with the regulation, with the Data Act. Well, I think, okay. So let's see how the Data Act addresses these big issues. How can I get my data back? How long it can take and how much it can cost? And it's really explicitly addressed in one chapter, which is chapter 6, with different articles, and these articles are rather detailed. So the title of the articles are written here: Removing Obstacles to Effective Switching Between Provider of Data Processing Services. So even the contracts that have been written before, well, they are not in line because they have to remove the obstacles. If there were contractual obstacles, commercial obstacles for switching, they should be removed. And it's described in these articles how it has to be made, in fact. And then Article 29 is also a shock on the market because it said gradual withdrawal of switching charges, including data egress charges. Data egress charges is the cost that a company has to pay just to get its data out of the environment of the provider. But if you have terabytes of data, and you just have to pay a small amount for each megabyte, well, it can come to very large amounts. And of course, it's a job. It's a task. It has a cost. But the Commission has decided that these costs have to decrease. First step is since 12 September, they can just be the real cost of switching, not extra cost of I don't know what. But the big change will happen on the cost towards January 2027. You can say it seems far away, but it's just 1 year and 4 months away. So it's not so far if you really intend, or if someone really intends to switch. One year is not such a long time, and you can prepare during 1 year and then benefit of the zero cost. And the zero cost covers also the data egress charge and other charges. So it's really a big one, comparable with what happened with the roaming cost in telecom or with the switching cost in the energy world. So it's really meaningful, and it's meant like that with this kind of comparison. Also, the timing for switching is really precise now, because the maximum timing for switching, the company can ask to the provider to switch, and the Data Act says within 30 days. Of course, if you have a big business, 30 days, well, might seem ridiculous. And then the provider, if he thinks 30 days is not possible, the provider can must say that no, the timing will not be 30 days. It may be 2, 3, 4, 5 months, maximum 7 months. So it's still a short time for very big business to be able to switch within 7 months. It's really maximum. So as you see, the Data Act really intends to change how to get your data back, because the clauses in the cloud contracts must describe how switching will happen. So you will have an answer, how can I get my data back? The timing I just told you, and the cost I also told you. So the Commission also wants to go further, because for GDPR, it took years before some clauses were written and adapted and improved, and all lawyers, in Europe and perhaps further, had to invent clauses. And the Commission has taken the challenge to try to do a better job this time. So they gathered an expert group, mostly university teachers and top lawyers from top law firms, and some business users. And so I was selected as a business user because I had know-how of switching and also data sharing. And we were 18 experts plus people from DG Justice and DG Connect to write these standard contractual clauses and also for data sharing contracts. So after 2.5 years, so we started September 2022 with meetings nearly every month, full meetings, and in between draft meetings, reviewed meetings, and so. And so we published the official report on the 4th of April, and this is so available. You got the link in the presentation there, but it's also, I think, somewhere on the website of Beltug. And the Commission has had engaged to publish before 12 September, but it was not possible because they also have to produce these documents in 24 languages from all the European countries. So it's busy, and the last contact we had is that they intend to produce this document, official version, for end of October, so it's nearly done. Perhaps it will be a little bit later, but for the importance of this business, it's really something good, great. Of course, this is, well, very detailed and adapted to the requirements of the Data Act. We can suppose that each provider will make its own. And because there is freedom of contracting, well, nobody is forced to use the standard contractual clause proposed. But perhaps for public tenders, it might be possible to require compliance with the standard contractual clauses. And so perhaps they might become a new reference on the market. And as a customer, you can always ask to have some of these clauses in your contract, because you can really say that they are aligned with the Data Act. And then it's the responsibility of the provider to demonstrate that what they propose is also in line. So it's a good base for discussion if you have the opportunity with a provider. Voilà, this is what I intended to tell as an introduction.
Hello, everyone. As mentioned already, I have the privilege to talk to you about the legal aspects of these SCCs for cloud computing contracts. For cloud computing contracts, or should we say for data processing services, as is the term under Chapter 6 of the Data Act. So before we dive into the details of the SCCs, I thought it was useful to discuss with you the notion of data processing services so that we know what we are talking about. You can see here the definition from the Data Act on the slides. But what is actually covered, it includes cloud, as Claude already mentioned, all types of cloud models, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service as well, as explicitly confirmed in the recitals of the Data Act, but also in the FAQs of the European Commission. And in that way, it includes things like online marketplaces, search engines, but also common office tools that are provided, for example, as a SaaS solution. So it's much broader than the typical US hyperscalers that you might associate with the word cloud, because those SaaS providers are also in scope. But it includes more. It also covers edge services. Edge services are services where processing is brought nearer to the source of the data, for example, on-device processing or processing on, for example, a server near the edge of your network. And it's even broader than that. The recitals of the Data Act indicate that it can, and it's not limited to these three delivery models plus edge, but it can also include emerging delivery models such as storage as a service or database as a service. So it basically includes all types of pre-packaged combination of ICT resources that satisfy the conditions that are mentioned here on the slide. If you then have a look in practice, where we see the most difficult condition sometimes or the condition that might allow a service not to qualify as a service that might look or have certain characteristics from a SaaS product, for example. But in many cases, or at least in some cases that we've already seen, that type of services can be excluded based on the last requirement. That's one of the most difficult ones sometimes in practice. So a digital service that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. So that means that the service must be self-provisioned. It must be released automatically or nearly automatically. If there is, for example, significant onboarding required on the side of the provider, that might be a reason why or to exclude that type of service from the concept of data processing services. But all in all, it's very broad. It also has a link with the established definition from NIST, and that's a US organization, has been there for many years. But that definition is focused on cloud only, sorry. This one is even bigger, as I just explained. There are a few exclusions, but also a lighter regime for custom build. So there are exclusions for preview versions and beta versions, and a lighter regime where the Data Act term or the provisions of Chapter 6 still apply, but only some of them apply. But for the topic of this presentation, the switching terms, that is applicable also for custom-built data processing services. And with that, we can move to the obligations that are applicable. If you now know what a data processing service is, it's worth having a look at what these providers need to do. They, as Claude already mentioned, they need to remove obstacle. There is a withdrawal, or they need to gradually withdraw their charges. There are also information obligations, but the minimum requirements for contracts are what we are going to look at today. And apart from that, there are also in other chapters of the Data Act obligations, very stringent obligations potentially in relation to interoperability, and also obligations in relation to the international governmental access and transfer obligations for non-personal data. So a bit the counterpart of the GDPR transfer obligation, but here for non-personal data, and also applicable to providers of data processing services. If we then move to the SCCs, what are they trying to cover? Well, in short, they basically cover these minimum contractual requirements from Article 25 of the Data Act and a bit more. Because the Commission, and I'll show that article on one of the next slides, the Commission was tasked with the drafting of a contract to assist parties in drafting and negotiating contracts with fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory contractual rights and obligations. And from that perspective, the expert group interpreted that mission in a way that they also included a few additional clauses that might help to better balance the contractual relationship with the provider. So if we look here at the list of clauses that have been prepared, A to D are strictly speaking relating to the requirements of Article 25, and then E to G are additional clauses that might be used to let's say, balance the relationship or to remove obstacles. That's then the more catch-all obligation. Here in a nutshell, we already talked about these things. So what are the key themes in that Article 25, in those minimum contractual requirements? Well, it includes, of course, the right to switch, but also the switching timelines, information that needs to be provided by the provider of data processing services, the assistance that needs to be provided, and termination of the agreement. These are like the main topics that are covered in Article 25, but therefore also by the SCCs. The SCCs, they do not cover additional requirements that stem from sector-specific regulations, such as NIS2, DORA, critical entities directive. So if you're subject, for example, if a public organization, if you're an organization in the energy sector, the health sector, you might be subject to those additional requirements. And you also need to take those into account. The SCCs as such do not cover those. And lastly, but not least, also a note on the MCTs. Claude also already referred to it. The expert group report includes two big parts. One part relates to the model contractual terms, which cover the requirements of Chapter 2 relating to the IoT data sharing obligations, and the other part relates to the SCCs for cloud switching. So it's important to know that Chapter 2 and Chapter 6 have totally different scopes of application. You might not have anything to do as an organization with IoT or connected products or related services, which are covered by Chapter 2, but still be subject or be able to benefit from the cloud switching term. So it's important to know that today we are talking about the SCCs for cloud, and it has nothing to do with the MCTs, but interesting, you might also encounter both at the same time in the same contract. It is possible that, for example, a related service, which is covered by Chapter 2, a service related to a connected product, such as a mobile app that you use in combination with, for example, a connected car, that type of service is provided as a SaaS service, and therefore is also a data processing service. So in that service contract, you might have both data sharing terms, that might be the model, contractual terms, and switching terms, that might be the SCCs. So what is the status? I'm going to skip this slide as Claude already explained this, but basically, the Commission is a bit late for a number of providers that have already done their homework, and they will already have, or they already have terms available to cover switching. But of course, the SCCs will remain useful for negotiations as a baseline for negotiations, and of course also for all the organizations that still have to draft their terms and that can use the SCCs for that. And as Claude mentioned, they will be available in all the EU languages, so that also might save some translation efforts. Then moving on to the question of how can companies use these SCCs. So first of all, what are these SCCs? They are template clauses. They are not complete contracts. They are not full agreements. So if we compare it to the standard contractual clauses that we know from the GDPR, they are not the same thing. And there you had a full set of clauses that you can just sign between the parties. That's not the case here for the SCCs. These SCCs are modular, separate clauses, and they belong together. They are aligned with each other, but you need to integrate them in your broader service agreement for your data processing services. How can you do that? Well, also for those who are familiar with the GDPR context, the incorporation by reference technique that is often used for the SCCs under GDPR will not work in my view, for the SCCs here, because there are too many options and information that needs to be completed. So that would become really messy and complex. They will need to be included in extenso. And you also need to take into account that you might need to localize certain parts of the clauses under local laws, depending on the information that you complete. For example, in relation to early termination penalties, if you complete those charges in the SCCs, you will need to consider also the applicable law. Then where do you include that? Well, we've seen that there are different ways to implement that. You can include that in an annex, a switching terms annex to your services agreement. You can also integrate the terms into the agreement itself. For example, the SCC on termination, you can add that to the clause on termination that might already be, or that will already be included in your services agreement. And often this is also combined with an operational annex or a web page, especially for providers, where information or the more operational information or procedures are described. So in practice, it will probably, or it can often be a combination of these three. So sometimes you might have an annex combined with certain clauses that are included in the services agreement, and then also an operational annex or a web page. And when can you start using them? I would say now you can already use them since 12 September 2025 because the Data Act Chapter 6 applies to existing agreements according to the Commission. So you can request an amendment or to bring an existing agreement in line with these with the Data Act. For example, if it's really important, depending on the type of services you might want to switch from, or you can wait until you negotiate a new agreement or you negotiate an update to the agreement. If you then have a look at the situations where SCCs are likely to be used in practice, although it might be useful to include them in many cases in practice, and also you need to look at the reality. Large providers often have their standard terms, and if you try to negotiate those terms, that is not always easy. And in most cases, you will start from the provider's terms and not from your own terms or from SCCs. And that's a bit in parallel with what we've seen under GDPR for a DPA. So where is the opportunity for the SCCs to be used? Mostly when you have a small provider and a small customer, there those parties might not have the necessary resources to draft their own clauses, and there the SCCs can be very useful. Also, if you have a small provider and a large customer, the large customer might be able to impose the use of the SCCs. Although there, I think we need to be a bit more nuanced. If we talk about really critical IT projects, those large customers might also prefer to develop very tailored, specific terms for that scenario and might also not use the SCC. So that this just to give you an idea of how this might play out in practice. And that is basically also in line with what the expert group notes itself in the report, where they say basically anyone can use it, provider and customer, big, small, private, public, but we expect in particular that they will be useful for those who don't have enough experience and resources to draft their own clauses. For the last part of my presentation, I wanted to show you a number of elements that we've seen emerging on the market after 12 September 2025. So what has happened is that a number of providers, maybe also a number of customers, have updated their standard documentation for their cloud agreements and have made that publicly available. We also assist clients with updating those agreements, and in that capacity, we've been monitoring what especially the bigger providers are doing. And there are some interesting positions, some interesting approaches that emerge from those documents. So first of all, if we have a look at the notions of exportable data and digital assets, we see in a number of examples, so I've included them on a no-name basis. And just to be clear, what is on the next slides, these are examples from publicly or non-publicly available switching terms that are already in use or suggested, provided today. So if we look at these notions, we see that some parties interpret these notions as merely referring to customer data. So in many services agreements, there is already a notion of or the definition for customer data. And we see that if we look at the switching terms, they don't talk about exportable data and digital assets as the Data Act does, but they refer to the export of customer data. Whether that is permissible will depend on the exact content of exportable data and digital assets for that specific service. So it might be that there is in practice not really any digital assets that are relevant to the service, and therefore that customer data, which in many cases, if you look at the definition, aligns with the concept of exportable data. It can be that it's broader and that it also includes some parts of digital assets, but that's something you need to check in the agreement. But it's noteworthy that they don't necessarily, or that the terms of the providers don't necessarily refer to the Data Act notions. And if you look at the normal or common definitions of customer data, I think that in some cases it's too narrow, because if this is a scheme that comes from the expert group report, if you look at what is included under digital assets, it includes also things like configurations, settings, access and control rights, things like that. And that's something that is usually not included under the definition of customer data. We also see that sometimes there is an exclusion for third-party software. And so that's not part of the customer data or the exportable data and digital assets, while under the Data Act, that's something that is explicitly, or something that needs to be explicitly included. So if you use third-party software on the environment of a provider, and that's something that that would be considered as a digital asset, and that would need to be that you would need to be able to switch under the Data Act. The same with configuration information. And then another point, we also see that in terms of exportable data and digital assets, under the Data Act, there is an obligation to provide an exhaustive specification of the data that are included under exportable data and digital assets. So basically transparency information. The provider needs to explain what type of data are included or that you can use to switch. Well, we see that in a number of these terms, they basically just refer to their service documentation, and then that service documentation is often incorporated by a reference to a web page. So you really need to look yourself where to find that information. And if you don't find it, you always have the question, did I miss something, or is it just not there? So that's quite difficult to find that information in some cases, or they just refer to the definition of customer data, which is very high level, and of course not a detailed list of exportable or of what is covered under exportable data and digital assets. Then something on timing. There you see this is the standard approach that is set out by the Data Act. It's also a graphic that comes from the expert group report. So basically there is a maximum notice period of 2 months. Then there is a maximum transitional period of 30 calendar days that can, in case of technical and feasibility, be extended to maximum 7 months. And then there is a minimum data retrieval period of 30 calendar days. Well, we see that also there is a bit of variation in the market practice that starts emerging. So first of all, some providers make a distinction between switching requests and deletion requests, and they only apply the Data Act timelines to the switching requests, not to the deletion request, which are then subject to the standard data export procedures that are often already included in an agreement. Another way to structure it is a self-service model, where the provider says you can always switch, you can always export your data and digital assets whenever you want. So, and then the notice is basically only for the termination. So what that means is that they basically switch the transitional period, that one comes first, and then there is a notice period to end the service agreement. So you can switch when the switching is done, then you need to give notice to terminate the agreement. So that's another way in which it is phrased. And then it's very small here on the slide, on the image, but while the provider is able to extend that basic transitional period, also the customer has a right to give an alternative transitional periods. And there we see that there are a number of providers that limit that extension period, for example, to 7 months. So the same period, maximum period for the provider, also the SCCs, the model SCCs in the report, they also provide for an option to limit that extension period for the customer, but the model clauses, they don't give a specific timing here. In a few examples, we saw that providers limit that to 7 months. Another provider subjects that right for the customer to provide an alternative transitional period to a prior notice of 1 month, which basically means that they only have 1 month to let the provider know that they want another transitional periods. And then there are also a few providers while that is while that is an obligation under Article 25, that they don't commit in their Data Act clause or in their switching terms to give notice of the termination of the contract. So basically, when the contract terminates, in the scenarios that the Data Act sets out, the provider would need to give notice to the customer that the contract is terminated. We see that that is something that is often not included in the clauses of the providers. So these are all reasons for customers to refer to the SCCs. On charges, in relation to switching charges, we see that it has a certain effect. In quite a few examples, the providers say that you can switch at no additional cost. And sometimes, in other cases, there is no explicit reference in the Data Act clause to any charges. So that might mean that it's included elsewhere in the agreement or in the contractual documentation, or that they just didn't include anything on that topic. In relation to early termination penalties for fixed-term contracts, so switching charges need to be reduced and will ultimately be prohibited, but early termination penalties are still permissible. That's also explicitly mentioned in the Data Act. And there we see that there are also different approaches by different providers. Some providers, they say that if you terminate or if you use your switching right and that results in the termination of the agreement, all the fees for the switched services for the remainder of the contract term need to be paid. Another provider says that 60% of the fees need to be paid, but if you only apply your switching rights to part of the services that you use, the fees for the remaining services that you want to continue will be increased. And then they provide an overview of that fee increase. Of course, there are also models where you need to prepay your services. If you have a fixed term contract, sometimes you need to, these are subject to prepayment. Well, also there we see that if you use your switching rights, sometimes you won't get your prepaid fees back. Or some providers merely refer to as required by law. So there, it will depend on the law and the local laws that are applicable on whether such a refund is due or not. So that's also quite interesting to see, because that's a really hot topic at the moment. A lot of providers are concerned that that their early termination penalties, that they wouldn't be able to charge what they want under the data with the application of the Data Act. And then there are a few other topics. We won't have time anymore to discuss all of them in detail, but I'll pick a few. There are providers who say that the switching terms, so they provide switching terms, but they only apply to new order forms, so to services concluded or cloud services that you purchase after 12 September or another date. There are providers who say, well, we provide you these terms, but they are not necessarily here to stay. And they already anticipate that the Data Act might at a certain point be amended, that it might be that certain obligations might be delayed, that there might be additional grace periods. So they already cover or they cater for that in their terms. Although, to my knowledge, the current omnibus initiatives, they don't explicitly refer to potential initiatives in relation to the Data Act. And then in terms of, in general, the practices of the providers, we also see that a number of big providers, they don't have any Data Act terms yet on their website. So it doesn't, and in those cases, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have them. Sometimes they provide those terms in another ways. They provide it to their customers directly or only upon request. So that's also something that we see in practice. And then lastly, Data Act FAQs. We see that switching terms For example, in an annex, there are certain terms that cover specifically the Data Act requirements, but they don't cover all of the requirements of Article 25. And that might have different reasons, but it might be that the provider says, well, some of these obligations were already covered in another part of our agreement, and therefore we won't copy that or we won't duplicate that in our Data Act clause or Data Act annex. What we also see there is that providers often make available a Data Act FAQ where they explain their approach in relation to Data Act and basically to avoid questions from customers or to already facilitate understanding by customers. So it's also interesting to have a look whether such an FAQ or a white paper is made available before you start reviewing such agreements, because it might save you significant amounts of time. And with that, I hope that these practical insights were useful, and we've come to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this Beltug session. Today we'll explore how the Data Act's SCCs can be applied in real practice. The goal is not just to repeat the legislation, even though sometimes it's unnecessary, but to interpret it through the lens of actual implementation, what works, what challenges arise, and what lessons can we learn. Think of this session as a bridge between regulatory ambition and operational reality. The presentation objectives. Well, the first one is has already been covered and well explained, so I'll just move on. Second, I'll share inspiration from our review of this clause at SMALS, highlighting both the opportunities and the challenges we encountered as a government cloud provider. Finally, I'll offer comments on the relevance and suitability of the SCCs, drawing on practical experience and considering their impact on both public and private sector organization. But to begin with, let me provide some context about SMALS. SMALS is a non-profit association and a public procurement entity that provides IT services to its members, and a growing part of these services has consisted of providing cloud services to our members, with a strong tradition of internal development, especially in infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. The government cloud service is something that has been in development for 10 years, where SMALS is not necessarily the service provider. We have something that is called the G-Cloud. It's a place where we create synergies. The G-Cloud is a hybrid cloud that uses services offered by private companies in public cloud environments on the one hand, and services hosted in government data centers on the other. The G-Cloud is managed by the government, and as I said, the government cloud services are not necessarily provided by SMALS, but generally speaking, they are based on our data centers. This means we have built much of our cloud environment ourselves, which give us deep technical control, but also means we have less experience with outsourcing to external cloud providers. As the public sector increasingly turns to external cloud solutions, the importance of strong, standardized contractual clauses grows. For us, the SCCs are not just a compliance exercise, they are a strategic tool to manage risk, to ensure continuity, and to maintain control over sensitive data during transition. Why use the SCCs? Well, first of all, to improve contract quality, SCCs provide clear, standardized language that reduces ambiguity and the risk of disputes. For example, by specifying explicit obligation for data handling and transition, they help both parties understand their responsibilities. The harmonization of practices, but by using a common set of clauses, organization can streamline negotiation and ensure consistency across contracts, even when dealing with multiple providers or jurisdictions. Then we believe it has a positive influence on hyperscaler offerings. SCCs set a benchmark that even large cloud providers must meet, encouraging them to, we hope so, their standard contracts to align with regulatory expectations. And then it's also a preparation for a growing adoption of the public cloud. As more organizations move to the cloud, SCCs helps ensure that legal and operational risks are managed proactively rather than reactively. What is true about this is that there are a lot of challenges now that make up an obstacle for further growing adoption of the public cloud, and a lot of them have to do with data handling. In practice, this means that when Smiles considers moving workloads to a public cloud provider, we must ensure that our contracts are as strong as our internal controls. The SCCs, I believe, help bridge that gap. Today, I will focus on four types of clauses addressed by the SCCs: the switching and exit, the security and business continuity, termination, and non-dispersion. Well, the switching and exit is often the most challenging aspect of cloud contracts. The ability to switch providers efficiently is essential for avoiding vendor lock-in and maintaining leverage in negotiation. The switching and exit clause, which you can find at page 135 of the final report, is designed to make it easier for organizations to change cloud providers or move back to on-premises solutions. This is particularly important for public procurement entities because they must regularly open their contracts to competition. And the ultimate effect is a reduced risk of dependence on any single provider, which is especially important for public sector entities handling sensitive data. In this slide, you can see a few key points on the switching and exit clause, but I believe it has already been covered and well explained before, so I'll just move on. Here we are. Yeah, so here is the clause that we have already in our request for proposal in our public tender. We can make some observations. It's really summary and minimalistic, so there's much to be improved on. Second observation, we already provide for a transitional protocol, but it is not annexed to the contract, and we expose ourselves to discussion at the end of the contract. A further observation is that Smiles has focused on a transitional period, giving the customer sufficient time in which we need to benefit from the two solutions, the old solution and the new one. Whereas the standard contractual clause approach the switching and exit as part of provider's obligation, as performance of the contract and not something that comes after. So what about automated exit tools or plans? I think here we can make a comparison with asset management for software licenses. Here too, we need to update the inventory of what we have, the duration it covers. For outsourced cloud services, it's much the same thing. We need to make sure we have an overview of what we have and the duration of our subscriptions. This means treating services as assets. It's not just contract management, but also asset management involving IT services, as they are the ones who depend on cloud services. So It is recommended to include a detailed switching and exit plan as an annex to your contract, specifying roles, timelines, and tools. In practice, this might even also include a step-by-step migration checklist, contact points for escalation, and predefined formats for data export. And when you prepare properly to manage this moment, it has the advantage of offering a structured, prepared approach to data management during the contract period. The things you need to do to prepare for an exit also ensure better quality during the contract period. For example, if in order to prepare for the exit, you periodically check that all data is available, accessible, stored, require backups, require data to be in a structured format. This has the secondary effect of improving the quality of what happens during the contract. And the retrievability of the data at the end of the contract is beneficial to the quality of the performance of the contract during its lifetime. The more experience you have, the more exit and switching activities will be part of the scripts. So from a contractual management point of view, a minimalist automated exit tools is a system that provides for internal alarm and notification for steps to take in the calendar regarding data. Next clause, the security and business continuity. This clause is really important to any cloud contract. The SCCs recognize that resilience is not just about technology, but also about process and governance. So the security and business continuity clause requires providers to go beyond contractual promises. This means regular testing of systems, conducting audits, and implementing redundancy measures to ensure that services remain available, and even in the event of failures. There's also an ongoing debate about cloud sovereignty and geopolitical risks. You just talked about it. For example, organization must consider whether their data is stored, what is the nationality of the cloud provider, and whether it could be subject to foreign jurisdiction or political instability. You just talked about the US. We all know the current situation, so that's a really important aspect to keep in mind. Let's break down some key points of the clause. So you'll find this clause on page 160 of the final report. And in this clause, providers must act with due care to maintain business continuity and ensure that all contracted services continue to function properly. This includes proactive risks management and incident response planning. Providers are also required to give clear information about any known risks to service continuity. This transparency enables customers to make informed decisions and prepare contingency plans. Also, security obligation extends to the switching process and the data retrieval period. Providers must maintain high level of security throughout, ensuring that data is not exposed or compromised during transitions. Customers should also assess and map out which aspects of their operation are most significantly impacted by security and continuity risks, especially during switching phases. This might involve business impact analysis or tabletop exercises, and so it's the main key points to have in mind when you read this clause on the final report. Yeah, so this is our clause in our own request for proposal. Sorry. As cloud environments become more complex, the ability to maintain continuity and security during transition will be a key differentiator for both providers and customers. Our RFPs requires the successful bidder to gather all relevant information, legal, political, economic, and technical, that could influence or compromise contract performance. If necessary, both parties must consult on measures to address these risks. Providers must also implement specific security measures, such as pseudonymization or encryption of personal data, ensuring, therefore, confidentiality, integrity, availability, and resilience of processing systems. We also require regular testing and evaluation of these measures. And for sensitive data, such as health information, we include audit clauses. And so the effect is dual. We achieve GDPR compliance and ensure the continuity of public services, even in the face of disruption. Okay, so now we move on to the termination clause. Termination is a critical phase in any contract lifecycle. The SCCs provide clear rules to ensure that the end of the contract is managed transparently and securely. Yeah, the termination clause regulates the end of the contract and the return of data. It is based on the principle of trust but verify, ensuring that all obligations are fulfilled and that there is protection against data loss. So transparency is key, both for compliance and for maintaining trust between parties. In this slide, again, you have some key points of the clause on the final report, but I'll just move on because it has already been covered. Okay, here again, this is what we have in our contracts, and our contracts state that the service provider must not retain data beyond the agreed retention period. Upon early termination or at the end of the service, all data must be returned in a conventional, structured, and commonly used format to ensure continuity of service. Once the data has been returned, and with the institution's agreement, the provider must destroy all copies, including backups and archives, within a reasonable period and provide proof of destruction. And this approach ensures both compliance and operational continuity. It's something, but there could be more. In the review of SMAL's clause regarding the SCCs, there is a specific SMAL's approach that has to be reconsidered, which is that everything that has to do with actual outsourcing of data handling is the subject of very specific technical requirements that are by their nature not standard contractual clauses. That's one of the reasons that our relevant clause looks very, I would say, minimalistic, but in comparison with the SCCs. All right. Yes, the non-dispersion clause. Well, the non-dispersion clause aims to limit the uncontrolled circulation of data and regulates third-party use. It also ensures that all relevant contractual terms, documentation, and information are collected, transparent, and easily accessible, avoiding information avoiding information asymmetry between provider and customer. The key points of the non-dispersion clause, well, the purpose is to ensuring that all contractual terms and documentation are accessible, which help both parties understand their obligation and risks. As I just said, this includes contracts, documentation, contact details, any material relevant for assessing obligation. Prospective customers should have access to up-to-date contracts and documents before entering into an agreement, enabling informed decision-making. Non-dispersion supports switching by making necessary information readily available and thus reducing obstacles due to missing or hard-to-find materials. So providers may request non-disclosure for sensitive details, such as security-related information or test results, but only on a need-to-know basis and subject to customary exceptions. And finally, providers must keep documentation to date and inform customers of changes, particularly regarding security and business continuity. On this slide, you can see that in our public tender, we require electronic submission of bids in specified formats, and all files must be grouped into zip files if necessary. Documents must be submitted in their original format, not converted to PDF, to ensure data integrity. Bidders must waive their own general terms and conditions unless expressly accepted, and any special conditions must be clearly stated and relevant to the contract. This approach streamlines the process and reduces the risk of contractual ambiguity. And the SCC, the clause, goes a little further as it provides that all contractual arrangements will be easily, readily, and continuously findable, available and accessible for the customer in one dedicated secure online location, and be in a comprehensible, human readable, as well as machine readable manner. In addition, the provider will ensure that the contractual arrangements are downloadable or otherwise exportable for the customer in a complete and structured manner. All right, practical issues. Well, let's now focus on the concrete challenges of implementing SCCs. Beyond the contract text, success depends on anticipation, tooling, and collaboration between legal, IT, and business teams. So, there is a need for concrete exit plans. An exit plan should not be just a theoretical document. It must detail step-by-step the migration, data inventory, responsibilities, timeline, checkpoints, and so forth. So regularly test, it's a practical tip, regularly test your exit plan through simulation exercise to identify weaknesses before a real migration occurs. I think automated contract management tools are also important. Automation helps track deadlines, generate alerts, centralize documents, and you can keep a history of contract changes. Using a contract management platform that automatically triggers notification, validation, and archiving workflows when preparing for an exit. So you should integrate your contract management tools with IT systems, for example, to automate access revocation or data export at the end of the contract. There's also an importance for technical implementation. The best contract clause is useless if technical teams are not prepared to execute it. So, for example, plan for standardized export scripts, documented APIs for data retrieval, and test environments to validate portability are really interesting. So it is advised to involve IT architects early in contract negotiations to ensure technical feasibility of contractual commitments. All right. Discussion and outlook. Well, to conclude, I'd like to share my thoughts on which practices to reinforce and what evolution to anticipate in the public cloud and SCCs landscape. Which practice should be reinforced? Well, start with the beginning and tackle the big one first. I think the ones I've talked about here are the big ones, but there are others, just as a reminder. So strengthen documentation of exit processes and schedule regular reviews of SCCs with providers. It's a good one. Interesting things here. I asked the AI to give me some insight on this, and I think the answer is interesting and will be more useful to the IT people who are listening to us than it will be for legal advisor. But so AI told me to implement maturity indicators, so KPIs. The idea of implementing maturity indicators or KPIs for reversibility and contractual security is about making these concepts measurable. So reversibility refers to how easily and effectively an organization can exit a cloud service, recovering its data, applications, and configuration without loss or dependency. So to assess maturity, we can use KPIs such as the average time needed to retrieve or migrate all exportable data, the number of successful switching simulation performed annually. Contractual security, on the other hand, measures how well the legal framework protects the organization throughout the contract life cycle. So typical KPIs include the coverage rate of contracts aligned with SCCs, the frequency of contractual reviews or audits, the existence of verification mechanisms, for example, proof of data deletion after termination. And together, these maturity indicators help organizations move from simple compliance to continuous assurance, knowing not only that the clauses are in place, but that they actually work in practice, which is the most important thing. How can we anticipate developments in public cloud? Well, obviously, you have to monitor changes in European regulations, Data Act, NIS2, but there are a lot of other regulations, and the emergence of new cloud models like multi-cloud, edge computing, and also the integration of AI in cloud services. So I would say that participate in working groups like today, Beltug, to share feedback and anticipate trends is a good way to start. And inspired by these clauses, and this is the EU's goal, I think the objective is to improve the quality of the market, and therefore aligning with these best practices and converting them into contractual clauses will make this possible. The EU's objective, and what everyone agrees on, is to stimulate the economy. This is also true with all these digital regulations. And the idea is to mature the market in the sense that both suppliers and customers benefit. There are fewer scams, fewer incidents, And this raises standards, which increases consumption and leads to economic growth. So the ultimate goal is to improve the quality of these services on the EU market. Which clause should be adapted in your contracts? Well, for example, adapt non-dispersion clauses to cover new uses. Like I said, AI-generated data. Strengthen obligation for returning logs and metadata, and include penalty mechanism for non-compliance with exit deadline. Have your contract reviewed by both technical and legal experts to ensure strongness against technological changes. So cloud contracting is becoming a strategic lever for digital sovereignty and risk management. Organizations that anticipate and that professionalize these practices will be better equipped to leverage the cloud while maintaining control. All right. So to conclude, you should. I believe that the standards, the SCCs provide real added value. So they're not just a regulatory requirement, they are a strategic asset. That they create a common legal foundation that reduces negotiation time, clarifies expectations, and minimizes the risk of disputes. For instance, when onboarding a new cloud provider, having SCCs in place allows both parties to focus on operational specifics rather than renegotiating basic legal protections each time. What about practical application and technical integration? I believe they are essential. I talked about it, exit plans, automated tools. The effectiveness of SCCs depends on their translation into operational processes. This means developing concrete exit plans, integrating contract requirements into IT workflows, and using automated tools to monitor compliance. There is an importance of balance between contractual guarantees and concrete implementation. A contract is only as strong as its implementation. Legal guarantees must be matched by operational readiness, which means clear roles, documented procedures, and regular testing. You clearly want to avoid having exit clauses existing on paper, but the technical teams are not prepared to execute them, leading to delays and increased costs during provider transitions. So it is crucial to involve both legal and technical experts in contract drafting and review. And finally, the public sector has a leading role, I believe, to play in imposing standards that protect sovereignty and security. Public sector organizations, due to their scale and regulatory influence, they can drive the adoption of strong standards that benefit the entire ecosystem. By demanding strong SCCs, they set a benchmark for the market. For example, when a government agency requires all cloud providers to comply with strict data localization and reversibility clauses, it encourages providers to upgrade their offerings for all clients. So this leadership is especially important for digital sovereignty and security, ensuring that critical data remains under appropriate control and that public interests are safeguarded. Well, what public service can do is all idealistic. We all know that when faced with big tech players, all of us, including small and medium-sized organizations, we're not as powerful as we would like to be. But we believe that with these SCCs and the Data Act, there is a path right there to improve this. So in summary, SCCs are only valuable if they are tested, operationalized, and supported by both legal and technical teams. Well, That's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this overview provided both a strategic and practical understanding of how the Data Act clauses can be implemented.